For months, the grand dining room of the Ashford estate had been silent. Crystal chandeliers glowed every evening over a table set for one, but the woman seated at its head barely touched a bite. Eleanor Ashford, the aging mother of millionaire businessman Daniel Ashford, had slowly stopped eating after the death of her husband. Specialists came from across the country. Nutritionists designed perfect meal plans. Celebrity chefs prepared expensive dishes with rare ingredients, flown in from around the world. Every plate returned to the kitchen untouched. Daniel watched his mother's health fade day by day. Once known for her warmth and laughter, Eleanor now spent most of her hours staring through the mansion's enormous windows at the rose garden she and her late husband had planted together. Doctors warned Daniel that medicine alone could no longer help. If she continued refusing food, she would soon become too weak to recover. The mansion staff whispered among themselves. Every new cook lasted only a few days before quitting in frustration. Some blamed Eleanor's grief. Others believed she had simply given up on life. One rainy Monday morning, the head housekeeper introduced the newest applicant. "Her name is Clara Bennett," she said quietly. "She doesn't have restaurant awards, but her references speak highly of her." Daniel looked up from his desk. Clara wore a simple gray coat, carried a worn leather recipe notebook, and spoke softly. "I know about your mother's condition," she said. "If you hire me, I won't promise miracles. I'll only promise that I'll cook with care." Daniel almost smiled for the first time in weeks. "Everyone before you promised miracles," he replied. "You're the first who hasn't." She was hired that afternoon. Instead of filling the kitchen with expensive ingredients, Clara spent her first day asking questions. What did Mrs. Ashford love to eat before all this? The staff looked at one another. "No one's asked that," one maid admitted. The gardener remembered Eleanor picking fresh herbs every spring. The chauffeur recalled that she often packed homemade chicken soup for charity visits. The old butler smiled faintly. "Every Sunday," he said, "she baked fresh bread with her husband." The whole house smelled wonderful. Clara wrote everything into her notebook. The next morning, she visited the estate garden herself. She picked rosemary, thyme, parsley, and a handful of carrots still covered with soil. She asked the dairy nearby for fresh cream instead of imported products. The kitchen staff watched in confusion. "No truffles? No lobster? No gold-covered desserts?" Clara shook her head. "I'm not cooking for a millionaire," she answered gently. "I'm cooking for someone's mother." That evening, Eleanor sat before another beautifully arranged dining table, expecting another untouched meal. Instead of silver domes hiding gourmet creations, Clara carried in a simple ceramic bowl. The aroma filled the room instantly. Fresh chicken soup. Warm homemade bread rested beside it with a small piece of butter, slowly melting across the crust. Nothing looked expensive. Everything smelled like home. Eleanor barely glanced at it. "I told your employer not to waste food." Clara didn't argue. Instead, she quietly placed an old wooden spoon beside the bowl. "I found this in the back kitchen," she said. "The housekeeper told me it belonged to you." Eleanor's eyes slowly moved toward the spoon. Her fingers trembled. She recognized every scratch on its handle. She had used it for nearly 30 years while cooking beside her husband. Without another word, Clara stepped back and left the dining room. No one interrupted the silence. Minutes passed. Daniel waited anxiously outside. The butler peeked through the doorway. Then something happened that no one had seen in months. Eleanor lifted the spoon. She brought a small spoonful of soup to her lips. She stopped, closed her eyes, and took another. Then another. Tears rolled silently down her face, not because the soup was extraordinary, because it tasted exactly like the Sundays she had shared with the love of her life. When Daniel entered carefully, he saw the empty bowl. His mother looked up with tired but gentle eyes. "It tastes," she whispered, "like I came home." Daniel struggled to speak. The next morning, Eleanor asked for breakfast. The servants nearly cried. Each day afterward, Clara prepared another familiar meal. Soft oatmeal with cinnamon, vegetable stew, apple pie made from Eleanor's own handwritten recipe that Clara had discovered tucked inside the old cookbook. Every meal awakened another forgotten memory. Instead of forcing nutrition into Eleanor's body, Clara quietly fed her heart. Within weeks, Eleanor regained enough strength to walk through the gardens again. One afternoon, she stopped beside Clara, who was gathering fresh herbs. Why didn't you cook fancy meals like everyone else? Eleanor asked. Clara smiled. My grandmother stopped eating after my grandfather died. Eleanor listened carefully. Doctors blamed illness, Clara continued. But she wasn't hungry for food. She was hungry for the life she'd lost. What happened? I stopped trying to impress her. Clara gently rubbed rosemary leaves between her fingers. I simply cooked the meals that reminded her she was still loved. Eleanor looked across the garden where roses bloomed despite the passing seasons. I thought everyone wanted to cure my body, she said softly. But you remembered my soul. Months later, Daniel organized a charity dinner honoring caregivers and home cooks rather than celebrity chefs. Hundreds attended. When the guests expected Daniel to deliver the keynote speech, he instead invited Clara to the stage. She hesitated before stepping forward. Daniel addressed the crowd. People think wealth solves every problem. He looked toward his smiling mother, seated proudly in the front row. I spent millions searching for ingredients from around the world. He paused. The cure was never hidden inside luxury. He turned toward Clara. It was hidden inside kindness, patience, memories, and a bowl of soup made with love. The audience stood in applause. But the most meaningful moment came afterward. Eleanor quietly walked onto the stage carrying the old wooden spoon. She placed it into Clara's hands. This fed my family for 30 years, she said. I thought its work had ended. She smiled warmly. But today I know it still has the power to save lives. Many in the audience wiped away tears. From that day on, Clara became more than the Ashford family's cook. She became part of the family itself. Eleanor often joined her in the kitchen, kneading bread, stirring soup, and sharing recipes that had almost been forgotten forever. Laughter slowly returned to the mansion, replacing the silence that grief had left behind. Daniel later realized that the greatest gift he could ever give his mother wasn't another expensive treatment or another famous expert. It was someone who understood that healing begins when a person feels remembered, valued, and loved. And every Sunday evening, as the comforting smell of fresh bread drifted through the halls once again, everyone in the Ashford estate was reminded that sometimes the simplest meal carries the greatest miracle.